Welcome to the Sleepy Historian, where history drifts gently into dreams. Tonight we step into the muddy, bone-chilling world of medieval Europe, where a peasant scrape by in the shadow of a king's golden castle. Picture this: it's dawn, and the air smells of damp straw and frost. Your breath clouds in the dim light filtering through cracks in your hut's wattle and daub walls. Somewhere a rooster screeches and you groan knowing the day's labor looms. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this life of endless toil and turnip soup. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a lumpy straw mattress, the kind that crunches when you shift and leaves you itching. It's early, maybe 5 in the morning, and the cold seeps through your threadbare blanket like a spiteful guest. Your hut, a one-room affair, smells of smoke from last night's fire, now just embers. The floor is packed dirt slick with damp, and as you swing your feet down, your toes curl at the chill. You're a peasant in, let's say, 13th century England, and your life is a daily gamble with hunger weather and the Lord's whims. Outside the village stirs a chorus of coughing neighbors and bleating goats. You pull on a rough wool tunic, stiff with grime, and lace up leather shoes that might as well be cardboard for all the protection they offer. Your stomach growls, but breakfast is a distant dream. You've got a crust of rye bread stashed under a floorboard saved from yesterday's ration, but you'll eat later after work. First, you need to check your tiny plot of land, a strip of field you share with the Lord's manor. The open field system, a hallmark of medieval agriculture, means your scraps of soil are scattered among the village's strips, all worked under the Lord's watchful eye. You grab a wooden hoe, its handle worn smooth by your calloused hands, and head out. The sky is gray, promising rain, and you mutter a prayer to Saint Swithin, the go-to saint for weather, though he rarely listens. As you step outside, the village smells hit you: manure, wood smoke, and something sour, probably a neighbor's failed attempt at brewing ale. Your hut sits among a dozen others, all huddled like nervous sheep around a muddy path. The church's bell tolls a reminder of morning prayers, but you can't spare the time. You've got to weed your barley before the Lord's bailiff notices and finds you a chicken you don't have. Medieval villages ran on this brutal rhythm, with peasants working the Lord's land first, then their own all while dodging taxes and tithes. Historians still argue whether the system was pure exploitation or a fragile balance that kept society ticking. Your neighbor Agnes limps by hauling a bucket of slop for her pigs. She's got a face like a disappointed turnip and a tongue sharper than a scythe. Heard the Lord's raising the mill tax again, she grumbles. Might as well grind our bones next. You nod, too tired for banter, but her words stick. The mill owned by the Lord charges you to grind your grain, and cheating by using a hand quern at home could land you in the stocks. You smirk, imagining Agnes sneaking a quern under her bed, whispering rebellion to her pigs. The path to your field is a slog through ankle-deep mud, and your shoes squelch with every step. A quirky tidbit: medieval peasants sometimes stuffed their shoes with straw for warmth, but it turned to mush and rain, leaving you with soggy toes. You pass a hedge, its thorns snagging your sleeve, and spot a rabbit darting into the brush. If you could trap it, that'd be a feast, but poaching on the Lord's land means a whipping or worse, losing a hand. You sigh and keep walking, the field now in sight, a patchwork of green and brown strips under a sky that's starting to spit rain. You kneel by your barley, pulling weeds with fingers numb from cold. Each weed feels like a tiny victory, but the field is endless, and your back already aches. You think of the king probably still snoring in a feather bed while you're out here wrestling mud. The contrast is stark: peasants like you made up 90% of Europe's population, toiling to feed the elite, while kings and nobles lived off your sweat. Yet there's a strange pride in your work, knowing your barley will feed the village, maybe even reach the Lord's table. You chuckle, imagining the Lord choking on a grain you planted, then shake your head. Daydreams won't fill your belly. The rain picks up, soaking your tunic, and you curse under your breath. A joke to lighten the mood. Why did the medieval peasant bring a ladder to the field? because the Lord's taxes kept raising the bar. You glance at the horizon where the Lord's manor looms, its stone walls a reminder of who really owns this land. Your day's just begun, and already you're dreaming of that crust of bread, maybe a fire to warm your hands. But for now, it's just you, the mud, and a long day ahead. You trudge through the muddy fields, your hoe slung over your shoulder, the rain now a steady drizzle that soaks your tunic and chills your bones. The path to your barley strip winds past other villagers' plots, each a narrow ribbon of green fighting against the gray sky. Your shoes already sodden from the morning's slog squish with every step, and you feel the cold creeping up your legs. The air smells of wet earth and manure, a scent so familiar it's practically your perfume. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and today, like every day, is about keeping your crops alive and your lord happy, though the latter feels like herding cats in a thunderstorm. The field stretches before you, a patchwork of strips under the open field system where your land mingles with the lord's and your neighbors. You share the system with the village, a medieval standard that ensured everyone had a slice of fertile soil, though it also meant constant scrutiny from the Lord's bailiff. You drop to your knees inspecting your barley. The stalks are thin, battered by last week's wind, and you spot patches of mildew creeping in. A mainstream fact crop rotation, alternating barley, wheat, and fallow fields, was a lifeline for medieval farmers, boosting yields by up to 50% in good years. You mutter a thanks to whoever figured that out, though it doesn't make the weeding any easier. Your hands, rough as old leather, dig into the soil, pulling up nettles that sting your fingers. A quirky tidbit, some peasants believed nettles could ward off evil spirits if you hung them over your door, but right now they're just a prickly nuisance. You toss them aside, glancing at the sky. The rain's picking up and you've got hours of work before you can even think about shelter. Historians still argue whether peasants were truly chained to this toil, or if they found small freedoms in their routines, like sneaking a nap behind a hedge. You're leaning toward the chained side given the ache in your back. A cow lows nearby, one of the village's shared herd grazing on the common pasture. You spot your neighbor Watt herding the beast with a stick. He's got a beard like a bird's nest and a grin that says he's up to no good. Heard the Lord's got a new steward, he calls. Meaner than a stepped-on snake. You roll your eyes, but the news lands like a stone. The steward oversees taxes, and a cruel one could mean more grain snatched from your stores. You joke to keep the mood light. Why did the peasant hide his barley? Because the Lord's taxman had a nose like a bloodhound. Watt chuckles, but you both know it's no laughing matter. You move to another patch, your knees sinking into the mud. The work is mindless but relentless, each weed a tiny battle in a war against starvation. You think of your family back in the hut depending on this harvest. Your daughter Emma is probably tending the fire, her small hands already calloused from chores. The thought of her keeps you going, though your stomach twists with hunger. You haven't eaten since yesterday's bread, and the Lord's fields come first always. You're owed 2 days a week on his land, a feudal obligation called boon work, and skipping it means a fine or worse. The mud clings to your hands, thick and cold, and you wipe them on your tunic, leaving smears like battle paint. A memory flickers that crust of bread you stashed under the floorboard, and you promise yourself a bite when you're done. But the field is vast, and the Lord's bailiff, a wiry man with eyes like a hawk, rides by on a horse, scanning for slackers. You keep your head down, working faster, though your shoulders scream. A second joke, what's a peasant's favorite dance? The dodge the bailiff shuffle. You smirk, but the bailiff's gaze lingers, and you focus on the weeds, heart pounding. In the distance, the castle looms, its stone towers cutting through the mist. You've never been inside, but you've heard tales of its warmth, its food, its beds softer than a summer cloud. The king, or maybe just the lord, is probably waking now, surrounded by servants. You imagine him biting into fresh bread, not the stale crust you're dreaming of. The contrast stings, but you shake it off. Envy won't plant barley. You pull another weed, your fingers brushing a worm, and you flick it away, grimacing. The rain's heavier now, turning the field into a swamp, and you wonder if St. Swithin's taking a nap. You pause, catching your breath, and glance at the village, a cluster of huts barely visible through the rain. Agnes's words about the mill tax echo, and you feel a spark of anger. But anger's a luxury you can't afford, not when survival means keeping your head down and your hands dirty. You return to the barley, each stalk a fragile hope for winter's survival. The day's young, but you're already exhausted, and the Lord's fields wait tomorrow. For now, it's just you, the mud, and the endless rhythm of toil. You're still out in the rain-soaked fields, your hands caked with mud, but your mind drifts to the castle on the hill where the king, or at least the Lord, begins his day in a world you can barely imagine. The barley at your knees sways under the drizzle, and you pause, wiping sweat and rain from your brow. Your tunic clings to your skin, heavy and cold, but the thought of the castle's warmth pulls you into a daydream. You're a peasant tethered to the muck, but for a moment you picture yourself slipping through those stone walls, invisible to see how the other half lives. Inside the castle, the air smells of beeswax candles and fresh-baked bread, not the manure and damp straw of your village. The great hall is alive with color tapestries woven with hunting scenes, their reds and golds glowing in the firelight. Servants bustle their shoes, clicking on stone floors, not squelching in mud like yours. The lord, or perhaps a visiting king, lounges at a high table, his velvet robes brushing the ground. A mainstream fact, medieval nobility consumed up to 6,000 calories daily, feasting on venison, swan, and spiced wine, while peasants like you survived on 2,000 calories of bread and pottage. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you of the crust waiting at home. A servant sets a trencher before the lord, a thick slice of bread piled with roasted boar, its fat glistening. He tears into it, grease on his beard, while minstrels strum lutes in the corner. You imagine the taste rich and smoky, a far cry from the gritty rye you choke down. A quirky tidbit, nobles sometimes use Sotelti's elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles or mythical beasts as table centerpieces, edible art you'd never dream of. You chuckle, picturing yourself nibbling a sugar dragon, then shake your head. A peasant with sugar, that's a joke, funnier than the Lord's jester. The Lord sips wine from a silver goblet, his rings glinting. He's surrounded by advisors, their voices low, discussing taxes or wars you'll never understand. Historians still argue whether medieval lords were strategic masterminds or just glorified bullies hoarding wealth while peasants starved. You lean toward the bully side, given the bailiff's glare yesterday. A servant refills the lord's goblet, and you notice the boy's hands, soft and unscarred, unlike your calloused paws. Even the castle's lowliest workers seem to live better than you, though you know their lives aren't all honey and harp music. Back in the field, a gust of wind snaps you out of the daydream. Your knees ache from crouching, and the barley looks sadder than ever. You pull a weed, its roots clinging stubbornly, and toss it into the mud. The castle's warmth feels like a taunt now, and you mutter a second joke. Why did the peasant envy the king's breakfast? Because even the king's crumbs were a feast. It's not that funny, but it keeps you sane. You glance at the castle again, its towers piercing the clouds, and wonder what the Lord's planning today. Probably not weeding barley in the rain. You move to another strip, your shoes sinking deeper into the mire. A memory flickers Agnes's grumble about the mill tax, and you feel that spark of anger again. The Lord's feasting while you're out here, half-starved, working his land. You've heard tales of lords who cared who lowered taxes in lean years, but yours isn't one of them. His new steward Watts, meaner than a snake, looms in your mind, and you grip your hoe tighter. The village depends on you, on Emma, on every muddy hand pulling weeds, but the castle's wealth feels like a slap. A rook caws overhead, landing on a nearby hedge, and you toss a clod of dirt to shoo it. Birds love barley, and you can't afford to lose a single stalk. You think of Emma probably stirring pottage, now her cough worse with the damp. If you could just harvest enough, maybe you'd afford a healer, though most are as useful as a bucket with holes. A third joke, why did the peasant trust the healer? Because hope was cheaper than medicine. You smirk, but it's hollow. The castle's still there. A stone giant mocking your toil, and you turn back to the barley, the rain a steady drum on your back. The field stretches on, and you know you'll be here till dusk, maybe longer if the bailiff's in a mood. You hum a tune, something your mother sang about harvests, and hope to keep your spirits up. The castle's out of reach, but your barley's real tangible, a lifeline for winter. You pull another weed, your fingers numb, and glance at the sky. The rain's not stopping, and neither are you. Somewhere the Lord's finishing his breakfast, but out here it's just you, the mud, and the endless fight to survive. You're back in the muddy field, the rain, a relentless patter on your sodden tunic, but your stomach's growling louder than the thunder rumbling in the distance. You've been weeding barley since dawn, and the thought of food, any food, pulls your mind from the castle's feasts to your own meager reality. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and while the lord up there savors boar and wine, you're dreaming of the stale rye crust hidden under your hut's floorboard. Your hands keep working, yanking weeds, but your thoughts are on survival, one bite at a time. You trudge back toward the village, your hoe heavy on your shoulder, the field left behind for now. The path is a quagmire, and your shoes, more holes than leather, squelch with every step. The air smells of wet straw and the faint tang of smoke from village hearths. Your hut's not far tucked among the cluster of low thatched roofs, and you quicken your pace, driven by hunger. A mainstream fact, medieval peasants relied on bread for up to 80% of their diet, often made from rye or barley, coarse and gritty enough to wear down teeth over time. You feel your own molars rough from years of chewing and wince. Inside your hut, the air is smoky, the fire barely alive under Emma's watchful eye. She's stirring a pot of pottage, a watery mix of oats, leeks, and a sad turnip bubbling over the embers. The smell's not exactly appetizing, more like damp socks than soup, but it's food. You fish out the rye crust from under the floorboard, brushing off dirt. It's hard as stone, and you soak it in the pottage to soften it, each bite a gritty chore. A quirky tidbit, some peasants added sawdust to bread in lean times, stretching the flour but wrecking their guts. You're grateful it's just rye, though you joke to Emma, "If this bread's any harder, we'll use it to patch the roof." She giggles, a small light in the dim hut. You sit on a wobbly stool, the fire's warmth a faint comfort against the damp. Emma ladles pottage into a wooden bowl, and you share it, sipping slowly to make it last. The taste is bland, but it fills the ache in your belly. You think of the Lord's boar, its fat dripping, and your mouth waters, but you push the thought away. Envy's a thief, stealing what little peace you have. Historians still argue whether peasants' diets were just enough to survive, or a slow starvation balanced by occasional feasts. You're not starving, not yet, but enough feels like a cruel tease when you're chewing grit. Outside, the rain drums on the thatch, and a drip lands in a bucket by the door. Emma coughs, her chest rattling, and you frown. She's been sick since the cold snap, and you've no coin for a healer, not with the Lord's taxes looming. You tell her a story, something about a fox outsmarting a wolf to keep her spirits up. Her eyes brighten, and you feel a pang of pride. She's tough like you, like every villager scraping by. A second joke, why did the peasant save his pottage? Because it was the only thing warmer than his blanket. Emma laughs, and you ruffle her hair, the moment a brief shield against the world. You glance at the door, knowing you'll head back to the field soon. The Lord's land waits, and skipping work means trouble. You think of Agnes's grumble about the mill tax, Watt's warning about the new steward. The village is a web of whispers, and you're all caught in it, bound by the Lord's rules. You finish the pottage, scraping the bowl, and tuck the crust's remnant away for later. A memory flickers, that castle banquet you imagined, all sugar dragons and silver goblets. You shake your head. That's not your world. Yours is here in the smoke and mud, with Emma's cough and a bowl of thin soup. The fire crackles, and you add a stick, the warmth a small defiance against the damp. You tell Emma to rest, though you know she'll sneak out to feed the chickens. You're proud of her, but worry gnaws at you. The harvest, the taxes, the rain, everything's a threat. A third joke, what's a peasant's favorite song, Ode to the Empty Bowl? You hum it under your breath, a silly tune to keep the gloom at bay. You stand stretching your aching back and grab your hoe. The fields call, and hunger's only half sated, but you've got no choice. The Lord's barley won't weed itself, and your own strips need you too. You step outside the rain, colder now, and glance at the castle, its towers faint through the mist. Somewhere the Lord's finishing his breakfast, maybe planning a hunt while you're back to the grind. You think of your barley, those fragile stalks fighting the mildew, and feel a stubborn spark. You'll keep going for Emma, for the village, for the hope of a better day. The mud sucks at your shoes, but you walk on the pottage, a faint warmth in your belly, carrying you forward. You're back in the village, the rain still falling, your belly barely satisfied from the watery pottage and that rock-hard rye crust. The muddy path squelches under your feet as you head toward the Lord's manor, your hoe resting on your shoulder like an old friend. The air smells of wet straw and the sharp tang of manure, but there's a new edge to the day, a tension you can feel in your bones. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and today the Lord's tax collector is coming a man whose shadow alone could sour milk. Your barley fields can wait. The Lord's demands always come first. The manor looms ahead, its stone walls stark against the gray sky, not as grand as the king's castle, but intimidating enough. You pass the mill, its wheel creaking under the river's push, and think of Agnes's grumble about the rising tax to grind your grain. The village is quiet, save for the cluck of chickens and the occasional curse from a neighbor tripping in the mud. A mainstream fact, feudal lords often claimed up to a third of a peasant's harvest through taxes and tithes, leaving families like yours scraping by on what remained. You clench your jaw, knowing every stalk of your barley is already half-owned. You reach the manor's courtyard, a muddy expanse bustling with servants and villagers. The tax collector, a gaunt man named Godfrey, stands by a cart, his ledger open, his eyes like a ferret's. He's flanked by 2 guards, their cudgels resting casually but ready. You join a line of villagers, each clutching sacks of grain or a few scrawny chickens. A quirky tidbit, some lords demanded Harriet a tax, where a dead peasant's family surrendered their best animal, often leaving them destitute. You mutter a prayer that Godfrey doesn't invent a new tax today, like charging for the air you breathe. Godfrey calls your name, his voice sharp as a blade. You step forward, heart pounding, and offer a small sack of barley, your rent for the land you work. He weighs it sneering and declares it short. You owe 2 more bushels by week's end, he snaps, or it's the stalks. You protest your harvest was meager, the mildew fierce, but his glare silences you. Historians still argue whether tax collectors were just doing their job or gleefully extorting peasants to curry favor with lords. You're betting on the latter, given Godfrey's smirk as he moves to the next villager. You step back, anger simmering like pottage on the fire, a joke to ease the sting. Why did the peasant dread the taxman? Because his scales weighed heavier than his heart. You force a chuckle, but it's hollow. Agnes is next, her face like a storm cloud as she hands over a hen. She mutters something about Godfrey's mother and a pig, and you stifle a grin. The village is a pressure pot, and Godfrey's the flame. You think of Watt's warning about the new steward meaner than a snake and wonder if things can get worse. Spoiler, they always do. You linger watching the line dwindle. A boy barely 10 offers a single egg, his family's entire payment. Godfrey snatches it and the boy's mother weeps. You want to punch something, but you're powerless, just another muddy figure in the Lord's game. You think of Emma safe in the hut and vow to keep her from this humiliation. A second joke. What's a peasant's favorite game? Dodge the taxman's boot. It's weak, but it keeps you from screaming. You turn away the manor's walls, a reminder of who holds the whip. The rain's heavier now, soaking your tunic, and you trudge back toward the village. A memory flickers Emma's cough, the pottage's thin warmth, and you feel a surge of defiance. You'll find a way to pay Godfrey, maybe hide a few grains for your family. The Lord's fields still need you tomorrow, and your own barley's crying for attention. A third joke. Why did the peasant plant secrets? Because they grew better than his crops. You smirk, imagining burying Godfrey's ledger in the mud. The manor fades behind you, but its weight lingers, a stone on your chest. You pass the church, its bell silent now, and spot a raven perched on a cross eyeing you like it knows your thoughts. You toss a pebble to shoo it, but it just caws, unimpressed. The village is ahead, your hut, a faint outline through the rain. You think of the castle again, the Lord's feast you imagined, all boar and sugar dragons. That world feels farther now, a fairy tale for fools. Your world is here in the mud and fear, with Godfrey's threats and a sack of barley you can't spare. You grip your hoe knuckles white and keep walking one step closer to home. You're trudging back from the manor, Godfrey's sneer still burning in your mind, the rain a cold slap on your face. The village fades into the mist behind you, but your thoughts leap to the castle where the lord, or maybe a king, holds court. a world of whispers and power far removed from your muddy reality. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your life bound to barley and taxes, but for a moment you imagine slipping into the great hall, a ghost among nobles to hear their schemes. The path squelches under your shoes, and you shift your hoe its weight, a reminder of the fields waiting. Inside the castle, the air is warm, thick with the scent of wax and herbs strewn on the floor. Torches flicker, casting shadows on stone walls hung with tapestries of unicorns and battles. The lord sits on a carved chair, his fur-lined cloak pooling like spilled wine. Nobles cluster around their voices, low plotting alliances or betrayals. A mainstream fact, medieval courts were hubs of political intrigue where lords and kings balanced loyalty and ambition, often sealing deals with marriages or bloodshed. You picture the lord, his eyes sharp, weighing every word while you're out here weighing barley for Godfrey's cart. A noble, his velvet tunic embroidered with silver murmurs about a rival lord's land ripe for the taking. Another suggests a marriage to secure an alliance, his daughter a pawn in their game. You smirk, imagining their shock if they saw your life all mud and pottage. A quirky tidbit, some nobles wore poulaines, pointed shoes so long they tied them to their knees to walk a fashion you'd trip over in the fields. You joke to yourself, why did the noble wear long shoes to keep his ego from touching the ground? It's a weak laugh, but it cuts the gloom. The lord leans forward, his goblet catching the firelight, and calls for his scribe. A parchment unrolls detailing taxes from villages like yours, and you feel a chill knowing your barley's in those numbers. A servant pours wine, and you notice her hands trembling slightly, probably fearing a misstep. Even here, fear rules, just dressed in silk. Historians still argue whether medieval courts were centers of culture or cesspools of greed, with lords hoarding wealth while peasants starved. You're betting on greed, given Godfrey's ledger and the manor's heavy taxes. Back on the path, the rain's a steady drum, and you shake off the daydream. Your tunic soaked and your stomach twists the pottage long gone. You pass a hedge, its thorns snagging your sleeve, and spot a fox darting into the brush. If you could trap it, that'd be a meal, but poaching's a risk you can't take, not with Godfrey's threats looming. A second joke. What's a peasant's favorite court? The one where the fox doesn't snitch. You chuckle, but it's fleeting. The castle's schemes feel distant, yet they shape your life, every tax and war trickling down to your fields. You think of Emma, her cough, and the barley you owe Godfrey. The village is a web, and you're caught, but so are the nobles tangled in their own plots. You wonder what the Lord's planning, maybe a war that'll demand more from your harvest. A memory flickers Agnes's muttered curse about Godfrey's mother, and you feel a spark of defiance. You'll pay the tax, but you'll hide a handful of grain, a small rebellion. The castle's out of reach, but your hut's close and Emma's waiting. You grip your hoe tighter, the mud sucking at your shoes. A raven caws from a tree, and you glance up, its eyes glinting like the Lord's rings. You toss a pebble, but it doesn't budge, just watches like it knows your secrets. A third joke. Why did the raven join the court? Because it loved a good plot twist. You smirk, but the castle's shadow lingers in your mind, its stone walls a world apart. The path curves toward the village, and you keep walking, the rain colder now. You think of the manor Godfrey scales and the barley you can't spare. Your life's a battle, not with swords, but with mud and hunger, and you're still fighting. The fields are ahead, your barley waiting, and you know you'll be back at it soon, Lord's land or yours. The court's intrigues are a story for minstrels, but your story's here in the wet and the work. You hum a tune, the one about harvests and hope, and feel a stubborn spark. You'll survive today, maybe tomorrow, for Emma, for the village. The castle can keep its plots. You've got your own small and quiet in the mud under your feet. You're back in the fields, the rain a faint drizzle now, but the mud still clings to your shoes like a jealous lover. Your hands grip the hoe, digging into the Lord's barley, your back screaming with every swing. The manor and Godfrey's threats linger in your mind, but the work doesn't wait, and neither does hunger. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your life a cycle of toil and taxes, and today's no different. The castle's intrigues, those whispered plots you imagined, feel like a distant song drowned out by the squelch of mud and the ache in your bones. The Lord's field stretches before you, its rows neater than your own, tended by a dozen villagers like you, all bent under the weight of obligation. A mainstream fact: medieval peasants often worked 3 days a week on their lord's land, a feudal duty called week work, leaving barely enough time for their own crops. You swipe at a weed, its roots stubborn, and curse under your breath. The bailiff's horse snorts nearby, his eyes scanning for slackers, and you keep moving your hands raw from the hose-worn handle. The air smells of wet earth and sweat, a reminder of how little separates you from the soil. A quirky tidbit: some peasants believed burying a toad in the field could boost the harvest, a charm you've never tried, but are tempted to give in your barley's mildew. You chuckle, imagining the bailiff's face if he caught you with a toad instead of a hoe. A joke to lighten the load: why did the peasant bring a toad to the field? Because it was better company than the bailiff. The thought keeps you going, though your shoulders burn and the sun barely visible through the clouds climbs higher, promising a long day. You glance at your neighbor, Watt, hacking at weeds a few rows over. His face is red, his curses creative enough to make a monk blush. "This land's greedier than Godfrey," he mutters, and you nod, feeling the same. The Lord's barley thrives while yours fights to survive, and the unfairness stings like a nettle. Historians still argue whether this system crushed peasant spirits or forged a quiet resilience, a community bound by shared struggle. You're leaning toward resilience, if only because giving up isn't an option, not with Emma waiting. Your hands move mechanically, pulling weeds, breaking clods, but your mind wanders to the village, to Emma's cough, to the barley you owe Godfrey. You think of Agnes's sharp tongue, her muttered rebellion, and feel a spark of something dangerous, hope maybe, or defiance. A second joke: what's a peasant's favorite tool? The hoe, because it's the only thing that listens. You smirk, but the bailiff's shadow passes, and you focus, your heart thudding. He doesn't stop, but his presence is a whip urging you faster. The field's endless, and your back's a knot of pain, but you keep at it, each swing a small victory. A memory flickers: that crust of bread you shared with Emma, its gritty taste a lifeline. You'll eat again tonight, maybe pottage if you're lucky, but the Lord's fields come first always. You spot a worm in the soil, fat and wriggling, and flick it away, grimacing. The earth's alive, but it's a harsh mother, giving just enough to keep you hoping. You think of the castle, its warm halls and silver goblets, and shake your head. That's not your fight. Yours is here in the dirt. A breeze carries the faint toll of the church bell, marking midday, and you pause, wiping your brow. The other villagers straighten, some muttering prayers, others just grateful for a moment's rest. Watt tosses a clod at you, grinning, and you lob one back, the brief play a rebellion against the grind. A third joke: why did the peasant love the rain? Because it was the only thing that worked harder than him. You laugh, and Watt joins in, but the bailiff's glare cuts it short. You return to the hoe, the rhythm swallowing you again. The Lord's barley looks strong, mocking your own struggling crop, and you feel a pang of envy, not for the castle's feasts, but for the chance to work your own land without fear. You think of Godfrey's scales, the sack you can't fill, and grit your teeth. You'll find a way, maybe hide a handful of grain, a secret to keep Emma fed. The field stretches on the mud, a heavy chain, but you swing the hoe, driven by the stubborn spark that keeps you alive. The castle can keep its plots. Your plots here in the earth, and you'll fight for it one weed at a time. You're slogging through the Lord's fields, the mud a familiar foe under your feet, but your mind drifts back to the castle where a feast unfolds its splendor, a sharp jab at your own hunger. The rains ease to a mist, and your hoe cuts through the soil, but the ache in your back and the memory of Godfrey's sneer keep you tethered to reality. You're a peasant in 13th century England. Your day's a grind of toil, but for a moment you sneak a mental peek into the great hall where the Lord, or maybe a king, basks in excess while you dream of pottage. Inside the castle, the air hums with laughter and the clink of goblets scented with rosemary and roasted meat. The great hall glows, its long tables draped in linen, laden with platters of venison, peacock, and fish glazed in honey. Servants weave through balancing trays of steaming pies, their crusts golden. A mainstream fact, medieval feasts could last hours with lords serving up to 30 dishes to flaunt wealth, while peasants like you counted a single onion as a treat. You imagine biting into a slice of boar, its juices warm, and your stomach twists still raw from that thin pottage. A jester cartwheels his bells jingling while minstrels pluck lutes singing of knights and dragons. The lord, his velvet robes brushing the floor, raises a goblet toasting some victory you'll never hear of. A quirky tidbit, feasts sometimes featured subtleties, edible sculptures of saints or castles crafted from marzipan to dazzle guests. You chuckle, picturing yourself stealing a marzipan knight, then shake your head. A joke, why did the peasant skip the feast? Because his invitation got lost in the mud. It's a fleeting laugh, but it keeps the bitterness at bay. Nobles gossip their voices, sharp, plotting marriages or wars, their plates piled high while your village starves. A lady in silk nibbles a candied fruit, her rings flashing, and you think of Emma, her hands calloused from stirring pottage. Historians still argue whether such feasts were mere decadence or strategic displays to cement alliances. You're betting on decadence given the empty bowls in your hut. A servant spills wine and the lord's shout makes her flinch, a reminder that even here fear lurks just wrapped in finery. Back in the field, a gust of wind snaps you to the present, the lord's barley swaying under your hoe. Your hands are numb, your tunic damp, and the feast's warmth feels like a cruel jest. You swipe at a weed, its roots deep, and think of Godfrey's scales, the barley you owe. A second joke. What's a peasant's favorite dish? The one he doesn't have to share with the Lord. You smirk, but the bailiff's horse trots by and you focus, heart thudding the hoe's rhythm, your only shield. You think of the village, Agnes's curses. Watts grumbles and the spark of defiance grows. The feast's a world away, but your barley's real, your fight's here. A memory flickers Emma's giggle over your fox and wolf story, and you grip the hoe tighter. You'll work the Lord's land, pay Godfrey, but you'll hide a handful of grain, a small victory. The field's vast and your back's a knot, but you keep going, driven by the stubborn hope of a full belly for Emma. A rook lands nearby, pecking at the soil, and you shoo it protective of the Lord's crop, though it galls you. A third joke, why did the rook crash the feast? Because it heard the Lord was serving some pie. You laugh softly, the sound lost in the wind. The castle's glow fades in your mind, replaced by the village, your hut, Emma's cough. You think of the manor, Godfrey's ledger, and the taxes choking you. The feast's a fairy tale, but your reality's the mud, the hoe, the endless labor. The sun's dipping, casting long shadows, and you pause, wiping your brow. The other villagers work on their silhouettes, bent, a silent army of survival. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma to home. The Lord's barley thrives, mocking your own struggling crop, but you'll tend yours next mildew or not. The castle can keep its marzipan and minstrels. Your feast is a crust shared with Emma, a fire's faint warmth. You swing the hoe, the earth yielding, and feel a quiet strength rooted in the dirt under your feet. You're back in the village now, the Lord's fields behind you for the day, the mud still caked on your shoes as you trudge toward the tavern. The rain stopped, leaving a damp chill in the air, scented with wood smoke and the faint sourness of ale. Your back aches, and Godfrey's threat, 2 more bushels by week's end, gnaws at you, but the tavern's glow promises a moment's escape. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and while the castle feasts, you're chasing whispers of rebellion over a cup of watery ale. The tavern, a low building with a sagging thatch roof, hums with voices as you push open the door. Inside, the air's warm, thick with the smell of sweat and spilled drink. A fire crackles in the corner, casting flickers on rough wooden benches packed with villagers. A mainstream fact, taverns were social hubs in medieval villages where peasants shared news grievances and sometimes dangerous ideas, often under the Lord's wary eye. You spot Watt, his beard flecked with foam, waving you over. You slide onto a bench, the wood creaking, and accept a chipped mug of ale, its taste more dirt than barley. Agnes is there, her eyes sharp, spinning a tale about a peddler who saw rebels in the next shire hiding in the woods. They're done with taxes, she says, voice low. Might burn a manor or two. The room buzzes, some nodding, others glancing at the door, nervous. A quirky tidbit, medieval rebels sometimes used Robin Hood as a code name, a nod to folklore heroes who defied lords, though no one's sure if he was real. You smirk, imagining yourself as a hooded outlaw, then sip your ale. A joke, why did the peasant visit the tavern to drink away the lord's taxes? It lands softly, but Watt chuckles. The talk turns darker, voices hushed. Watt mentions the new steward said to flog peasants for late payments. Someone whispers about hiding grain, and you feel a spark remembering your own plan to stash a handful. Historians still argue whether peasant revolts were desperate outbursts or organized resistance sparked by men like you, tired of empty bowls. You're leaning toward desperation given the fear in the room, but the ale fuels a flicker of courage. You lean in listening as Agnes describes a secret meeting in the woods, though she doesn't say when. A stranger, a tinker with a patched cloak, pipes up, claiming he saw the Lord's men seize a whole village's harvest last year. The room bristles and you grip your mug thinking of Emma, her cough, your barley. A second joke, what's a peasant's favorite song, taxman, leave my grain alone. You hum it under your breath and Agnes snorts, but the mood's tense, the air heavy with what's unsaid. The tavern's a tinderbox and one wrong word could spark trouble or land you in the stocks. You glance at the door, half expecting the bailiff to barge in, but it's just a gust of wind rattling the shutters. A memory flickers Emma's giggle over your fox story, and you feel a pang. You're here for her for a future where she doesn't choke on pottage. The ale's gone, and you push the mug away, the buzz not worth the coin. A third joke, why did the ale taste like mud? Because the tavern brewer was Godfrey's cousin. You smirk, but it's hollow. The rebellion talk swirls, and you wonder if it's real or just tavern bravado. The fire's dying, and the tavern thins out, villagers slipping into the night. Watt claps your shoulder, his eyes serious. Think on it, he says, and you nod, not committing. You step outside the cold, biting the village dark, save for a few glowing huts. The castle looms on the hill, its towers a silent threat, and you think of the feast, all marzipan and minstrels. That's not your world. Yours is here in the whispers and the mud with Agnes's fire and Watt's warnings. You head home, the path slick, your thoughts a tangle of fear and defiance. Godfrey's scales, the steward's whip, the rebels in the woods, they're all pieces of a puzzle you can't solve. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma to hope. The tavern's gossip lingers, a seed planted, and you wonder if you'll join that meeting, risk everything for a chance at less hunger. For now, it's just you, the night, and the weight of survival, one step at a time. You're trudging through the village, the tavern's whispers of rebellion still buzzing in your ears. But the path leads you past the fields and into the forest's edge where the lord, or perhaps a king, hunts with his retinue. The air is crisp, scented with pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the tavern's sour ale and smoke. Your hose at home, your hands free but restless as you pause to watch the spectacle from a safe distance. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your life a grind of mud and taxes, but the hunt's a glimpse into a world of power and play, far from your own. Through the trees, you spot the lord's party, a burst of color against the forest's green. Horses snort, their saddles gleaming, while hounds bay, eager for the chase. The lord, in a crimson cloak, rides tall, a falcon perched on his gloved fist. Nobles flank him, their laughter sharp bows slung across their backs. A mainstream fact hunting was a noble privilege in medieval Europe, with lords reserving vast forests for deer and boar, while peasants caught poaching faced mutilation or death. You crouch behind a bush, knowing one wrong move could cost you a hand. The hounds bolt, chasing a stag, and the lord spurs his horse, his horn blaring. The scene's alive, chaotic, a stark contrast to your field's quiet toil. A quirky tidbit: some lords trained falcons to hunt smaller prey like hares and treated them better than their servants with velvet hoods and silver bells. You smirk, imagining a falcon eating better than you, then mutter a joke. Why did the lord love his falcon? Because it never asked for a day off. It's a weak laugh, but it keeps you grounded as the hunt surges past, hooves thundering. You shift thorns pricking your sleeve and watch a noble loose an arrow, missing the stag, but cursing like Wat after bad ale. The lord laughs, his voice carrying, and you feel a pang of resentment. He's playing while you're dodging Godfrey's scales and hiding grain for Emma. Historians still argue whether hunting was mere sport or a way for lords to flex control, keeping forests off limits to starving peasants. You're betting on control given the bailiff's patrols and the stocks waiting for poachers. A hound veers close, sniffing the air, and your heart jumps. You freeze, praying it doesn't scent you. The dog moves on and you exhale, but the fear lingers. You think of the tavern Agnes's talk of rebels and wonder if they hide in these woods watching the same hunt. A second joke: what's a peasant's favorite hunt? The one where he's not the prey. You chuckle softly, but the lord's horn sounds again, and you sink lower, the bush, your only shield. The hunt's a game for them, but for you, it's a reminder of who owns the land, the deer, even the air you breathe. You think of Emma, her cough, and the barley you owe. The forest's alive with the hunt's noise, but it's no place for you, not with the lord's men so close. A memory flickers Wat's serious eyes in the tavern, his think on it about the rebels. You push it down. Rebellion's a dream, and dreams don't fill bellies. The stag crashes through the brush, the hounds closing in, and you feel a strange pity for it, running for its life like you run from taxes and hunger. A third joke: why did the stag outrun the lord? Because it had more to lose than pride. You smirk, but the hunt's moving off the horns fainter now. You stand brushing dirt from your tunic and glance at the castle, its towers peeking through the trees. The lord's feast, all marzipan and minstrels, waits for him, while you've got pottage and a leaking roof. The forest feels heavy, its shadows hiding rebels or danger, and you turn back toward the village, the path familiar under your feet. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma, to home. The hunt's a spectacle, but your fight's quieter in the fields and the tavern's whispers. You think of Godfrey's ledger, the steward's whip, and the grain you'll hide. The lord can keep his falcons and forests. Your world's the village, the mud, the stubborn hope of survival. The trees thin, and the village appears, its huts huddled against the dusk. You walk on the hunt's echoes, fading your own battle, calling you forward. You're back in the village, the forest's hunt fading like a half-remembered dream, your feet carrying you through the muddy lanes toward the village green where a rare festival hums with life. The air smells of fresh straw and roasting apples, a sweet relief from the usual manure and smoke. Your tunic's still damp. Godfrey's threat: 2 more bushels gnawing at you, but the festival's music, a piper's jaunty tune, pulls you forward. You're a peasant in 13th century England. Your day's a slog of toil, but today's a flicker of joy, a chance to forget the lord's shadow and dance like you're not starving. The green is alive, villagers crowding around makeshift stalls draped in faded cloth. Children chase a piglet shrieking while old men toss dice in the shade. A mainstream fact: medieval festivals, often tied to saints' days, were vital for peasant morale, offering a break from labor with dancing games and rare treats like ale or honey cakes. You weave through the crowd, spotting Wat juggling apples, his grin wide. He tosses you one and you catch it, its skin bruised but sweet. You take a bite, juice dripping, and for a moment the world feels lighter. A girl strums a lute, her voice wobbly but earnest, singing of a knight who slayed a dragon. A quirky tidbit: some festivals featured mummers' plays, crude skits where peasants mocked lords as bumbling fools, a risky jab at authority. You smirk, imagining Godfrey as a mummer's villain booed by the crowd. A joke: why did the peasant love the festival? Because even the pigs got a day off, you laugh, and Wat joins in, offering you a sip of his ale stronger than the tavern's slop. You sip, the warmth spreading, and feel a spark of something rare: hope. You spot Emma near a stall, her eyes bright despite her cough, clutching a ribbon from a peddler's cart. She waves and you wave back, heart swelling. You'd give anything for her to have more days like this free from chores and hunger. Historians still argue whether festivals were true escapes or just a lord's trick to keep peasants content, distracting them from rebellion. You're leaning toward escape, given the smile on Emma's face as she twirls her ribbon, but Godfrey's shadow looms, and you know the Lord's taxes don't pause for pipers. A dance starts, villagers linking arms, their steps clumsy but joyful. You're tempted to join, but your back aches, and the memory of the tavern's rebel talk tugs at you. Watt pulls you in anyway, and you stumble through a reel, laughing despite yourself. A second joke. What's a peasant's best dance move? The dodge the taxman twirl, the crowd cheers, and you spin the world, a blur of color and music. For a moment, you're not a peasant, just a man alive under the open sky, Emma's giggle in your ears. The peddler, a wiry man with a patched cloak, hawks wooden charms, claiming they ward off fever. You think of Emma's cough and pause, but your coin's too scarce, and charms are as trusty as a leaky bucket. A woman buys one, her face desperate, and you feel a pang. The festival's a balm, but it doesn't heal the village's wounds. Hunger, sickness, Godfrey's scales. You think of the hunt, the Lord's falcon, and the castle's feasts, all marzipan and minstrels. That world's a stone's throw away, but it might as well be the moon. A third joke. Why did the festival pig run free? Because it knew the Lord's cook was watching. You chuckle, but the piper's tune slows and the crowd thins, some drifting to stalls, others to the ale barrel. You find Emma tying her ribbon in her hair and ruffle her head. Stay close, you say, and she nods, her cough quieter today. The festival's a gift, but the fields wait, and Godfrey's deadline looms. You think of Agnes's rebel whispers, Watts think on it, and feel a stir, a dangerous seed taking root. The sun's dipping, casting long shadows, and the green empties, the piper packing up. You take Emma's hand, the apple's core still in your pocket, a small treasure. The castle looms on the hill, its towers cold, and you hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to home. The festival's joy lingers, but reality's creeping back with taxes, toil, and a barley debt you can't pay. You walk on Emma's ribbon, bright against the dusk, your heart torn between the dance's warmth and the fight ahead. You're walking away from the festival, Emma's hand in yours, her ribbon fluttering as the village green fades behind you. The air's cooler now, scented with damp earth and the faint sweetness of roasted apples. But a new weight settles in your chest. A rider's hoofbeats echo, and you turn to see a herald from the manor, his cloak emblazoned with the Lord's crest, pinning a parchment to the church door. Villagers gather, their festival joy draining, and you know bad news is coming. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and the Lord's whims never bring smiles. You edge closer, Emma clutching your sleeve, and squint at the parchment, though you can't read its curling script. Watt's there, his face grim, muttering the words aloud for the crowd. It's a new tax, a scutage to fund the Lord's war, demanding an extra bushel of grain per household by month's end. A mainstream fact scutage, or shield money, was a feudal tax peasants paid to avoid military service, often funding Lord's campaigns while leaving villages poorer. Your heart sinks, Godfrey's 2-bushel threat, already a noose, and now this. Your barley can't stretch that far. Murmurs ripple through the crowd, some cursing, others staring blankly. Agnes, her eyes like flint spits, they'll tax our shadows next. A quirky tidbit, some medieval lords imposed bizarre taxes like a hearth tax on fireplaces, forcing peasants to freeze or pay. You clench your fists, imagining Godfrey taxing the air in your hut. A joke. Why did the Lord tax the rain? Because he wanted to own the mud too. It's bitter, but Emma giggles and you squeeze her hand, hiding your fear. The herald rides off, leaving the village buzzing with anger. Watt pulls you aside, his voice low. This is why the woods are stirring, he says, meaning the rebels. You nod, the tavern's whispers, now a roar in your head. Historians still argue whether taxes like scutage sparked revolts or just deepened despair, crushing peasants under endless demands. You're leaning toward revolt, the spark in your gut growing, though fear keeps it caged. You think of Emma, her cough, and the barley you've already promised Godfrey. Another tax feels like a blade. You lead Emma away, the church bell tolling behind you, its sound heavy like a warning. The festival's warmth is gone, replaced by the cold reality of survival. A second joke, what's a peasant's favorite tax, the one he can't pay? You force a smile for Emma, but your mind's racing. Hiding grain was one thing, but this new tax means leaner days, maybe no pottage for weeks. You think of the hunt, the Lord's falcon soaring while you scrape by, and the castle's feasts all honeyed fish and marzipan. That world's laughing at you. The village feels smaller, its huts huddled under the castle's shadow. You pass the tavern, its door shut, but you can imagine Agnes and Watt inside plotting or cursing. A memory flickers Emma's ribbon at the festival, her brief joy a light you're desperate to keep. You'll fight for her, but how? The woods, the rebels, it's a path of no return. A third joke, why did the peasant read the Lord's decree? To practice for his nightmares. You chuckle, but it's hollow, the parchment's words a weight you can't shake. You reach your hut, the thatch dripping from earlier rain, and duck inside. Emma coughs, settling by the fire, and you stoke it, the warmth a small defiance. You think of the fields, your barley struggling, and Godfrey's scales now joined by the scutage. The festival's music feels like a lie, the dance a fleeting dream. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to hope, but it's fraying. The Lord's war, his taxes, his castle, they're a storm, and you're just a reed in the wind. You sit the stool, creaking, and pull Emma close, her ribbon bright in the firelight. The village is a tinderbox, and the new tax is a spark. You think of Watt's think on it, Agnes's fire, and the woods where rebels might be waiting. For now, it's just you, the hut, and the fight to keep Emma fed. The castle looms in your mind, its towers cold, and you wonder if the Lord even knows your name. You kiss Emma's head, vowing to find a way, one bushel, one day, one step at a time. You're in your hut, the fire's faint crackle battling the damp chill, Emma asleep beside you. Her ribbon, a splash of color in the dim light. The new scutage tax, piled on Godfrey's demands, sits like a stone in your gut, and the village's anger from the church door lingers. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your life a tightrope over hunger and taxes, but today you're done bending. You slip outside the night air sharp and head to your barley strip, driven by a quiet plan to hide grain, a small defiance against the Lord's greed. The village is dark, save for a few glowing huts, the air thick with the scent of wet straw and distant wood smoke. You move silently, your hoe over your shoulder, the path to your field familiar under your feet. A mainstream fact, medieval peasants often hid crops to dodge taxes, burying grain in secret pits, or mixing it with chaff to fool collectors like Godfrey. You reach your barley, it stalks ghostly in the moonlight, and kneel, digging a shallow hole with your hands. The soil's cold, clinging to your fingers, but each handful feels like a victory. You've saved a small sack of barley, gleaned from weeks of careful work, and you bury it, covering it with dirt and a flat stone. A quirky tidbit, some peasants hid grain in hollowed-out logs, believing spirits guarded their stash, though you're trusting plain dirt over ghosts. You pat the stone, smirking, and mutter a joke. Why did the peasant bury his grain? Because the Lord's taxman couldn't dig past his own ego. It's a fleeting laugh, but it fuels the spark in your chest. A fire. Agnes's tavern talk and Watt's whispers have stoked. The night's quiet, save for a hooting owl, and you glance around, half expecting the bailiff's horse. Hiding grain's a risk, stalks a fine or worse if Godfrey catches you, but Emma's cough echoes in your mind, and you'll do anything to keep her fed. Historians still argue whether such acts were petty crimes or quiet rebellions, seeds of larger revolts. You're leaning toward rebellion, though. It's just you and the dirt tonight, no woods or rebels, just a father's desperate math. You think of the festival, Emma's ribbon, and the scutage parchment, its script a chain. The Lord's hunt, his falcon soaring, feels like a taunt. His castle feasts a world away. A second joke, what's a peasant's best hiding spot? Under the Lord's nose, because he never looks down. You chuckle, brushing dirt from your hands, but the weight of Godfrey's scales and the new tax presses harder. You've hidden enough for a week's pottage, maybe two, but it's a drop against the flood of demands. A rustle in the hedge makes you freeze, heart pounding, but it's just a fox, its eyes glinting before it darts away. You exhale the night's dangers, real bandits' wolves, or the bailiff's patrol. A memory flickers Watts think on it in the tavern, his hint at the woods rebels. You're not there yet, but this buried grain is a step a line crossed. You stand the field silent and feel a strange pride, not for the Lord's barley you weeded, but for this secret, yours alone. A third joke. Why did the fox watch the peasant? Because it wanted tips on dodging the Lord. You smirk, shouldering your hoe, and head back the village, a shadow ahead. The castle looms on the hill, its towers cold, and you think of the great hall, all marzipan and minstrels, while your feast is a hidden sack and a daughter's smile. The scutage, Godfrey's ledger, the steward's whip, they're a storm, but you're fighting not with swords, but with dirt and cunning. You slip into the hut, Emma still asleep, her breathing soft despite her cough. You stoke the fire, its warmth a shield, and sit the stool creaking. The buried grain's a secret, you'll guard a spark to keep you going. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to hope, though the woods rebels tug at your thoughts. For now it's just you, the fire, and the fight to outsmart the Lord's greed. The night's deep, and tomorrow's fields wait, but you've carved out a sliver of power buried under a stone. You're back in the village, the buried grain a secret warming your chest, but the morning brings a grim spectacle that chills it again. You stand at the edge of the market square, Emma clinging to your side as the Lord's men prepare a public punishment, their presence a cold reminder of the castle's power. The air smells of damp straw and fear. The crowd hush their festival joy, a distant memory. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your defiance hiding that barley still fresh, but the Lord's justice looms a warning to anyone dreaming of rebellion. The square is packed, villagers pressed shoulder to shoulder, their faces taut. A wooden platform holds the stalks, and nearby a whipping post looms. Two men, their tunics torn, are dragged forward accused of poaching in the Lord's forest. A mainstream fact, medieval justice was harsh with poaching, often punished by flogging or mutilation, as lords guarded their game fiercely to preserve noble privilege. You recognize one prisoner, a tinker named Hal, who shared ale at the tavern, his eyes now wide with terror. You grip Emma's hand, shielding her from the worst. The lord or his steward, a gaunt man with a snake's smile, watches from a horse, his cloak rich with fur. A herald reads the charges, his voice cutting through the murmurs, stealing the Lord's deer, defying his law. The crowd shift, some muttering, others silent, knowing Hal's crime was likely hunger, not greed. A quirky tidbit, some lords staged mock trials for animals like pigs, condemning them for crimes to amuse nobles while peasants faced real whips. You mutter a joke. Why did the deer snitch on Hal? Because it wanted a seat at the Lord's feast. Emma doesn't hear, and your glad humor feels thin today. The steward nods and a guard cracks a whip, its snap making you flinch. Hal's tied to the post, his back bared, and the first lash lands his cry sharp. You look away, bile rising, and pull Emma closer, her cough muffled against your tunic. Historians still argue whether such punishments deterred crime or fueled resentment, pushing peasants toward revolt. You're betting on resentment, the crowd's low growls echoing your own anger, though fear keeps you still. Godfrey's scutage tacks his scales, and now this, they're a fist closing around the village. The second man, a stranger, is locked in the stocks, his face bruised, jeered by the Lord's men. A boy throws a rotten turnip, egged on by a guard, and you think of Watt's rebel whispers, Agnes's fire. Hiding grain was one thing, but this brutality makes the woods rebels feel closer, their shadows in every glance. A second joke. What's a peasant's worst crime? Thinking he's hungrier than the Lord's hounds. You swallow it, the square too grim for laughter, and focus on Emma. Her eyes fixed on the ground, ribbon limp in her hair. The steward dismounts, striding past Hal now slumped, and you catch his gaze cold and unyielding. He's the snake Watt warned of, meaner than Godfrey, and you wonder if he knows about the tavern's talk, your buried barley. A memory flickers Emma's festival dance, her brief joy a world away from this. You want to run, take her, and flee, but the village is your cage, the Lord's justice its bars. The whipping ends, Hal's moans fading, and the crowd disperses, heads low, the lesson clear, defy and suffer. A third joke. Why did the stocks love the peasant? Because they got to hug him all day. It's bitter, and you keep it to yourself, leading Emma away, the square's stench, blood, and mud clinging to you. The castle looms its towers a fist against the sky, and you think of its feasts, marzipan nights, while Hal bleeds for a deer. The scutage, Godfrey's ledger, the steward's whip, they're a storm, and your grain's a frail shield. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to hope, but it's faint, drowned by the whip's echo. You reach your hut, the thatch dripping, and settle Emma by the fire, her cough sharp. You stoke the flames, the warmth a small fight against the day's chill. The punishment's a warning, but your barley's still buried, a secret spark. You think of the wood swats, think on it, and feel a pull, dangerous but alive. For now it's just you, Emma, and the hut, the Lord's justice, a shadow outside. You kiss her forehead, vowing to protect her one hidden grain, one day at a time. You're lying awake in your hut, the fire reduced to embers. Emma's soft breathing beside you, a fragile anchor in the dark. The whip's crack from the square still echoes in your mind, Hal's cries mingling with Godfrey's tax demands, and the scutage parchment's weight. The night air seeps through the thatch, carrying the scent of damp straw, and a faint howl wolf or wind you can't tell. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your buried barley a secret spark, but fear claws at you, whispering of bandits' beasts and the Lord's ever-watchful eye. The village sleeps or tries to its huts, silent under a moonless sky. You shift on your straw mattress, the crunch loud in the stillness, and pull your thin blanket tighter. A mainstream fact, medieval peasants faced constant threats at night, from wolves raiding livestock to bandits looting poorly guarded villages, with no police but the Lord's men who cared more for taxes than safety. You think of your chickens huddled in their coop and the barley strip unguarded but for your stone marker. If bandits hit, you'd lose everything, and Godfrey wouldn't care. A creak outside makes you freeze heart-thudding, but it's just the wind rattling the door. A quirky tidbit, some peasants hung garlic over their doors, believing it repelled both bandits and spirits, a charm you skipped for lack of garlic and faith. You mutter a joke, why did the peasant fear the night? Because even the shadows worked for the Lord. It's a weak laugh, but it steadies you. You think of Emma, her cough worse tonight, and the buried grain, your only shield against hunger. Losing it would break you. You sit up, peering through a crack in the wall. The village is a void, save for a distant dog's bark, but your mind conjures threats, wolves circling bandits eyeing your hut. Historians still argue whether peasant fears were overblown or justified, given spotty records of raids versus tales of terror. You're betting on justified, the whip's echo, and Hal's blood-proof, the world's cruel. You think of the tavern Watt's rebel hints, and the woods where danger and defiance mix. The buried barley feels like a step toward that, but tonight it's just you against the dark. A memory flickers Emma's festival ribbon, its brightness a taunt against this gloom. You check on her, her face pale in the ember light, and adjust her blanket, vowing to keep her safe. A second joke. What's a peasant's best guard? A chicken because it squawks louder than his courage. You smirk, but the night's heavy, the castle's shadow looming in your mind, its feasts and falcons a world away. The steward's whip, Godfrey's scales, the scutage, they're a noose, and your grain's a fraying rope. Another howl closer, and you grip a stick by the fire, a pitiful weapon. You think of the hunt, the Lord's hounds chasing stags while you chase sleep. If wolves come, you'd fight, but the real beasts are Godfrey's ledger and the Lord's greed. You hum that harvest tune, its notes, a thread to dawn, but it's faint, drowned by fear. A third joke. Why did the wolf scare the peasant? Because it had better manners than the steward. You chuckle softly, the sound swallowed by the hut's walls, and lie back, eyes on the thatch. The night stretches, each creak a test, and you think of Watt's think on it, Agnes's fire, the rebels in the woods. Joining them feels like leaping into the dark, but staying here under the Lord's boot is its own terror. You think of Hal, his back torn, and the buried grain a small defiance, but not enough. The castle's towers, cold on the hill, mock you, its marzipan knights a fairy tale. Your fights here in the hut, with Emma's cough and a stick against the night. Dawn's far off and sleeps a stranger, but you close your eyes, the fire's glow a faint shield. The buried barley's safe for now, and Emma's breathing steadies. You vow to face tomorrow, bandits, or not, Godfrey or not. The village is a cage, but you're still fighting one secret one night at a time. The wind howls again, and you hold the stick tighter, the harvest tune a whisper carrying you toward a morning you hope to see. You're trudging through the village at dawn, the night's fears, wolves, bandits, and the whip's echo still clinging like damp straw. The air smells of frost and smoke, and your breath clouds as you head toward the castle's shadow, drawn by a rare chance to glimpse its splendor from the outside. Emma's cough kept you up, but she's resting now, and you need to see the world that demands your barley and your sweat. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your hidden grain a secret spark, but the castle's golden glow is a magnet pulling you to its gates. The path climbs the castle's stone walls, rising its turrets piercing the pale sky. You stay off the main road, sticking to hedges to avoid the bailiff's patrol, your tunic snagging on thorns. The castle's outer yard bustles with servants hauling firewood and carts of wine barrels, their chatter a hum. A mainstream fact, medieval castles were self-sufficient hubs with forges, bakeries, and gardens sustaining hundreds, while peasants like you starved outside their walls. You pause, marveling at the sheer scale it stones, a fortune you'll never touch. A golden light spills from a high window, stained glass glinting with saints and lions. You imagine the great hall, its tapestries and feasts, the marzipan nights you've only dreamed of. A quirky tidbit, some castles had guard-robes, toilet chutes that dumped waste into moats, giving the air a whiff. You're glad to miss from here. You smirk, muttering a joke. Why did the peasant admire the castle? Because even its stink was richer than his. It's a small laugh, but it keeps the envy at bay as you creep closer, the wall's shadow cool on your face. Servants hurry past one, dropping a loaf, its crust white, not your gritty rye. You're tempted to grab it, but a guard's eye catches you and you freeze, heart pounding. He moves on and you exhale the castle's wealth, a taunt. Historians still argue whether castles were fortresses of order or monuments to greed, hoarding riches, while villages crumbled. You're betting on greed, given Godfrey's scales, the scutage tax, and Hal's bloodied back. The castle's beauty hides a fist, and you're its favorite punching bag. You circle the wall, spotting a garden through a gate, its herbs and roses a world away from your barley's mildew. A lady in silk strolls there, her laughter light, and you think of Emma, her ribbon, your only silk. A second joke. What's a peasant's castle? A hut where the roof only leaks half the time. You chuckle, but it's bitter the lady's ease a mirror to your toil. You think of the tavern's rebel talk, Watts think on it, and the woods their shadows closer now. Your buried grain feels bolder, a step toward something bigger, though fear keeps you tethered. A cart rumbles by, loaded with apples for the Lord's table, and you step back, the guard's gaze lingering. You think of the hunt, the Lord's falcon, and the feast's honeyed fish, all paid for with your sweat. A memory flickers Emma's festival dance, her joy a flame you're fighting for. The castle's golden glow is a lie, its warmth not for you, but your barley's real hidden under that stone. A third joke. Why did the castle shine? Because it was polished with peasant tears. You smirk, turning away the village, calling you back. The path slopes down the castle's splendor, fading its towers cold against the dawn. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma to hope. The scutage, Godfrey's ledger, the steward's whip, they're a storm, but your grain's a shield, small but yours. You think of Hal's punishment, the wood's rebels, and feel a pull, a dangerous seed growing. The village appears, its huts huddled, and you walk on the castle's shadow, long but not unbreakable. Your fights in the mud with Emma's cough and a secret sack, one step at a time. You're back in the village, the castle's golden glow a fading taunt as you weave through muddy lanes, your feet heavy from sleepless nights and the weight of Godfrey's taxes. Emma's cough echoes in your mind sharper now, and you're headed to the healer's hut, a last hope for relief you can't afford. The air smells of damp straw and brewing herbs, a faint tang cutting through the usual manure. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your buried barley a secret spark, but sickness is a thief, and you're desperate to keep Emma safe. The healer's hut squats at the village's edge, its thatch mossy smoke curling from a hole in the roof. Inside, the air's thick with sage, and something sour jars of roots and dried leaves lining the walls. Old Meg the healer hunches over a table, her fingers stained, green eyes sharp despite her wrinkles. A mainstream fact, medieval healers, often women, used herbs like feverfew and yarrow, blending knowledge with superstition as formal medicine was for nobles. You clutch a small sack of barley, not your hidden stash payment for Meg's aid, and pray it's enough. You explain Emma's cough, your voice low, and Meg nods, grinding herbs with a pestle. She mutters about bad humors and hands you a pouch of dried mint and honey paste, saying to mix it with warm water. A quirky tidbit, some healers prescribed amulets with toad bones, believing they drew out illness. A remedy Meg skips, thankfully. You smirk, muttering a joke. Why did the peasant trust the healer? Because her herbs smelled better than his pottage. Meg doesn't laugh, her focus on a bubbling pot, but the humor keeps your fear at bay. You hand over the barley, your heart sinking as Meg weighs it, her nod grudging. Emma's worth it, but the sack was meant for bread, and Godfrey's scutage looms. Historians still argue whether healers were vital community pillars or distrusted quacks, their cures as likely to harm as help. You're betting on vital, given Meg's steady hands and the hope in your chest. You think of the castle, its rose gardens and silk-clad ladies, while Emma chokes on damp air. Meg's hut, crude as it is, feels more human than that stone giant. You step outside the pouch, tucked in your tunic, the village waking with clucks and curses. A memory flickers Emma's festival ribbon, her twirl in the dance, and you vow to see her smile again. A second joke, what's a peasant's best medicine? A full belly, but good luck finding it. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The healer's fee, a new hole in your survival. You think of Watt's rebel whispers, the wood's shadows, and your buried grain, a small defiance against Godfrey's scales. Meg's herbs are another fight for Emma against a foe you can't punch. A cart rattles by a peddler hawking charms, and you shake your head, trusting Meg's mint over his nonsense. The castle looms, its towers cold, and you think of its feasts, marzipan nights, while you barter barley for hope. Hal's whipping the steward's snake eyes, the scutage they're a storm, and Meg's pouch is a frail shield. A third joke. Why did the herb cure the peasant? Because it was cheaper than praying to the Lord. You smirk, the village's bustle pulling you forward, the hut's warmth fading. You head home, the path, slick your thoughts on Emma, the mint, and the fire you'll stoke. The tavern's rebel talk, Watts think on it, tugs at you, the woods a dangerous lure. Your buried grain's safe, but it won't cure coughs or pay taxes. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma, to a morning where she breathes easy. The village is a cage, but you're fighting with herbs and secrets, one step at a time. The castle can keep its roses. Your garden's a pouch of mint, and it's enough for now. You're trudging back from the healer's hut, the pouch of mint and honey paste tucked in your tunic. Emma's cough, a drumbeat in your thoughts. The village hums with morning chores, but your path takes you near the castle again, where whispers of war drift from its walls, a new threat to your barley and your secrets. The air smells of frost and wood smoke, the castle's towers sharp against the sky. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your hidden grain a defiant spark, but the Lord's plans, like Godfrey's taxes, could crush you without a glance. You linger by a hedgerow out of sight as a cart rumbles from the castle gate loaded with spears and shields. Servants shout, and you overhear a guard mention a war council, the Lord, or maybe a king, plotting a campaign against a rival. A mainstream fact, medieval wars were often funded by peasant taxes, like the scutage you're choking on, with lords raising armies to settle feuds or grab land, leaving villages to starve. You clench your fists, the scutage parchments weight heavier now, your barley feeding swords instead of Emma. A noble rides past his horse, snorting his cloak embroidered with gold. He's barking orders, something about levying more men, and you shrink into the hedge thorns pricking your sleeve. A quirky tidbit: some lords used war horns carved from ox bones, their eerie wail rallying troops, but terrifying villagers like you who heard them as doom. You mutter a joke. Why did the peasant hate war horns? Because they sounded like Godfrey's tax demands. It's a weak laugh, but it steadies you as the noble's horse kicks mud onto your tunic, a careless insult. You edge closer, catching snippets from a servant unloading the cart. The Lord's Council debated all night, weighing alliances and costs with your village's grain as their coin. Historians still argue whether such wars were strategic power plays or reckless ego trips draining peasants to fuel noble pride. You're betting on ego, given the scutage, and Hal's whipped back the castle's greed, a blade at your throat. You think of Emma, her cough, and the mint pouch, your fight for her now tangled with war's shadow. The castle gate clangs shut, and you retreat, the hedge your shield. A memory flickers Emma's festival ribbon, her twirl alight against this gloom. You think of Watt's rebel whispers, the wood's shadows, and your buried grain, a small rebellion, but not enough for war's hunger. A second joke: what's a peasant's role in war? To pay for it and pray he's not drafted. You smirk, but the War Council's plans chill you, the scutage, a chain pulling tighter. Your barley's not yours anymore. It's the lord's, the war's, the castle's. A raven caws perched on a fence, and you toss a pebble, its glint like the noble's gold. The war's a storm, and you're a reed bending, but not broken. You think of the tavern Agnes's fire and the woods where rebels might be planning their own council. Joining them feels like stepping into a wolf's jaws, but staying here under taxes and whips is its own trap. A third joke: why did the peasant fear the war? Because the Lord fought with his grain and his hope. You chuckle, the sound lost in the wind, and turn toward the village. The path slopes down the castle's towers, fading its war plans, a distant rumble. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma, to the mint pouch, to a morning where she breathes easy. The scutage, Godfrey's scales, the steward's whip, now war, they're a noose, but your grain's buried, your fight alive. The village appears, its huts huddled, and you walk on the war's shadow, long but not total. Your battle's in the mud with Emma's cough and a secret sack, one step, one breath at a time. You're slipping through the village at dusk, the War Council's whispers and Emma's cough driving you to a dangerous choice. The air is thick with damp straw and the faint tang of brewing ale, but you're headed to a hidden meeting drawn by Watt's Think on It and Agnes's tavern fire. Your buried barley's a secret spark, but it's not enough against the scutage, Godfrey's scales, and the Lord's war. You're a peasant in 13th century England, and tonight you're stepping into the woods where rebels whisper of resistance, a path that could save or doom you. The village fades, its huts dark, as you follow a narrow trail into the forest, guided by a notched tree Watt described. The air shifts, pine and earth replacing smoke, and your heart pounds each snap of a twig, a threat. A mainstream fact: peasant revolts, like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt, often began in secret meetings with villagers plotting to burn manors or defy taxes driven by hunger and injustice. You clutch a stick, a pitiful weapon, and move deeper. The castle's towers lost behind the trees, its war horns a distant fear. A low whistle stops you, and Watt emerges, his beard a shadow with Agnes, and a stranger, a wiry man with scars. They lead you to a clearing where a dozen villagers huddle, their faces grim. Agnes speaks, her voice low, about hiding harvests, stealing tools, maybe burning the manor's ledger. A quirky tidbit: some rebels used greenwood as a code for forests, a nod to folklore outlaws like the Robin Hood you laughed about in the tavern. You mutter a joke: why did the peasant join the rebels? Because the woods had better taxes. It's a flicker of humor, but Agnes's glare silences you. The stranger, calling himself Jack, outlines a plan: sabotage the manor's mill, slow the Lord's war machine, and rally more villages. It's bold, reckless, and you think of Hal's whipped back the steward's snake eyes. Historians still argue whether such rebellions were doomed outbursts or near misses that shook feudal power. You're betting on doomed, but the scutages wait Emma's cough, and your buried grain push you forward. You nod, committing the clearing a vow you can't unmake. You think of Emma, her ribbon, and the mint pouch, your fight for her now tied to this. A second joke, what's a peasant's rebellion? A dream where the Lord pays the taxes. You keep it to yourself, the group's tension thick, their whispers of fire and freedom, a spark in your gut. A memory flickers the festival's dance, Emma's twirl a light you're risking everything for. The woods are alive owls hooting, and you wonder if the Lord's men patrol here if Jack's a traitor. Your buried grain feels small now, a child's game against this. Jack assigns tasks, yours to scout the mill's guards, a job that could land you in the stocks. You swallow fear, thinking of Watts ale Agnes's curses and the war's hunger for your barley. A third joke. Why did the rebel trust the woods? Because the trees didn't snitch to Godfrey. You smirk, but it's fleeting, the clearing's shadows deep. The meeting ends and you slip back. Watts clap on your shoulder, a silent oath. The village looms its huts a cage, but you're no longer just a reed in the storm. The path home is quiet, your stick tapping the ground, the harvest tune a faint hum. The castles wore Godfrey's ledger, the steward's whip. They're a noose, but the wood's rebels are a blade sharp and double-edged. You think of the healer's mint, Emma's cough, and your buried grain, small defiances now part of something bigger. The hut's ahead, Emma's breathing a beacon, and you vow to protect her mill, or no mill rebellion, or none. You step inside, the fire's glow a shield, and sit the night heavy with secrets, one step closer to a fight you can't avoid. You're back in your hut, the rebel meeting's whispers clinging to you like damp straw. The night's secrets heavy as you stoke the fire, its glow a faint shield against the dawn. Emma sleeps, her cough softer thanks to Meg's mint, her ribbon a bright thread in the dim light. The village stirs, outside roosters crowing, but your mind's on the woods. Jack's plan to sabotage the mill and the scutage tax choking your barley. You're a peasant in 13th century England, your buried grain and rebel vow a spark, but today you're searching for hope, a reason to keep fighting. You step outside, the air crisp with frost, the village bathed in pale light. The fields stretch ahead, your barley strip waiting its stalks, frail but stubborn like you. A mainstream fact, medieval peasants often saw survival as a collective triumph, their harvests binding villages through shared labor and defiance of lords. You kneel by your crop fingers, brushing the soil where your grain's hidden, and feel a quiet pride. The castle looms its towers cold, but your fight's here in the mud with Emma's smile and the rebel's fire. A quirky tidbit, some peasants carved runes into tools, believing they brought luck for harvests, a charm you've never tried but wish you had. You smirk, muttering a joke. Why did the peasant carve his hoe to convince it to work harder than Godfrey? It's a soft laugh, the dawn's stillness swallowing it, but it steadies you. You think of Watts' clap, Agnes's curses, and Jack's scarred face, their rebellion a gamble you've joined. Historians still argue whether peasant resilience was born of hope or desperation, a refusal to break under Lord's boots. You're betting on hope, faint but fierce, like the mint easing Emma's breath. You stand the village, waking smoke curling from huts. A memory flickers, Emma's festival twirl, her ribbon, a light you're fighting for. The war's shadow, Godfrey's scales, the steward's whip, they're a storm, but your buried grain, Meg's herbs and the wood's plan are roots holding you fast. A second joke. What's a peasant's dawn? The moment he outsmarts the Lord's greed. You chuckle, the field's quiet, a canvas for your thoughts. The mill's guards your next step, a task that could free or fell you. The church bell tolls and you glance at the castle, its feasts and falcons a world apart. You think of Hal's blood, the scutage parchment, and the woods clearing, each a piece of your fight. A third joke, why did the peasant love the sunrise? Because it didn't tax his dreams. You hum that harvest tune, its notes a thread to Emma, to a future where she dances without coughing. The village is a cage, but you're no longer bending your rebellion small, but growing one secret, one step at a time. You head home, the path familiar, the dawn's light softening the mud. Emma's awake stirring pottage, and you kiss her forehead, her ribbon bright. You'll scout the millhide, more grain fight for her for the village. The castle can keep its marzipan. Your feast is her smile, your strength in the dirt. You sit the fire warm and feel a stubborn hope rooted deep carrying you forward. As the fire's glow fades, the world softens, the village's hum, a gentle lullaby. Your barley sways in memory, its stalks whispering of resilience of mornings yet to come. The wood's shadows, the mill's risk, they drift away, leaving only Emma's breathing steady now, a rhythm to guide you. Close your eyes, let the dawn's promise wrap you warm as a blanket, and sink into dreams where no lord can reach. The fight waits, but for now, rest carried by hope's quiet song into a sleep as deep as the earth. Thank you for joining this journey through medieval Europe with the sleepy historian. I hope the tale of mud barley and quiet rebellion lulled you toward rest. If you enjoyed it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from. For now, sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next boring history for sleep.